Good day to you. This is Philosophy Roulette number 96, where we grab philosophy papers and read and review them. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to be on fill papers. If anyone wants to send me something to read, I'd love to hear it. But until that happens again, and it does happen, I'm just going to grab some new journal articles. Acta Biotheoretica. How could this happen? Well, let's see. How could it happen? See how long this is, if it's available. Nope, that's not it. Let's just take a look at Acta Biotheoretica anyway. I mean, unfortunately, I think Acta Biotheoretica is a little too technical in the biology area. I mean, I can't really read this sort of stuff because it's scientific data. It's just not convenient to read online. Bioethics. Let's see what bioethics has. We've done some bioethics papers. Papers in the area of bioethics. I don't know if I've read anything from this journal though. Alright, so it looks like we've got a few. This is probably one of those very small fonts, so the page numbers are low. Slipping on slippery slope arguments. Well, yeah, so we're going to have to assume that none of these papers are actually that short, because they're all that short. So, I don't know. It's just, if I can't decide on length, what else is there? Alright, so this is 10 pages. I'm going to have to try and go for something shorter than 10, because that's probably closer to 20 to 25. This is 6. Let's see. Another 6. Procreation machines. Well, let's see. This is always a fun topic. See if it's available. I've heard people talk on it once or twice. No, it's not available. Can't read it. Let's see about this one. Alright. Suki Finn. I've heard of I know. I've met Suki Finn before. Let's see if Suki Finn has put her stuff online. Suki Finn was good enough to do so. Cool. So we're gonna read Suki's paper, and Suki and Elsa. Let's go with Elselijn Kingma. So let's see. This is 9 pages. It's gonna be long, but what are you gonna do? Okay, so and if you are in the chat room, which is pretty cool, you can recover the link if it's not just up already by typing !paper in the chat box. Yeah, see, lots of small typeface, but what are you gonna do? Save file. Okie dokie. Alright, so, and we're off. Okay, introduction. In 2017, Nature reported a successful extrauterine support system for extremely premature lambs. This was variously reported as a uterus-like plastic sac and a unique womb-like device, and more often an artificial womb. It sparked widespread media speculation about the imminent arrival of human ectogenesis, to the expressed frustration of the authors of the essay, who are notably careful to avoid any such terminology in their article. They state their goal is not to extend the current limitations of viability, but strictly to improve the outcome for those infants who who are already cared for in neonatal intensive care units. Yet the media reaction is hardly surprising. The idea of artificial gestation, of growing babies in bottles, has a proud and prominent place in our cultural history. Although the promise of a genuine artificial womb remains sci-fi, its lure is understandable. What pregnant person has not wished, albeit only briefly, that they could leave their body in its bulk and weight, or that she could park her fetus on a shelf and run, drink, smoke, jump, dance, work, and make love ad libitum, free from the risk, burdens, and moral and physical constraints that the actual gestation entails. Bioethical speculation about the risks and benefits of ectogenesis tend to focus on two strands. One concerns its effect on women, optimistically the liberation of women from natural inequalities due to differential reproductive physiology, and the social inequalities built on the back of that. More pessimistic visions concern further and new forms of pressure, oppression, and devaluation of women that may be enabled by these technologies. The second strand considers what the possibility of ectogenesis could tell us about and how it might affect abortion rights and debates about moral status and fetal personhood. This paper highlights an important metaphysical dimension that is non-linear and may add to the latter debate. Birth marks a substantive physiological transition that makes fetuses and neonates, I haven't used that word before. I haven't, I'm sure everyone else has. Different from each other regardless of either their development or gestational age, or their location inside or outside the pregnant organism. This is funny, I just realized I did shave off my beard yesterday, so now I've got a mustache, and I just find this entirely hilarious. I'm probably going to shave it off later, but I'm looking at my broadcast now, so I hope you guys laugh at me too. It's funny. Anyway, this allows us to give precise accounts of the difference between fetuses, gestatelings, and neonates, between artificial gestation and neonatal incubation, and between different kinds of extracorporeal fetal and neonatal support systems, artificial wombs, artificial amnion and placenta technology, and neonatal incubators. Section 2 introduces ectogenesis, ectogestation, and the central question about their difference. Section 3 considers an earlier attempt to analyze this difference and finds it to be insufficient. Section 4 introduces the investigations into the metaphysics of pregnancy and explains how such a reflection invites us to differentiate fetuses from neonates regardless of gestational age or viability. Section 5 delivers a precise classification of ectogenative technologies and their subjects. Section 6 considers consequences and ethical implications. Okay, so ectogenesis, incubation or ectogestation. I must say, I really like this topic for its words. I don't get to say these words very often. What is ectogenesis? Strictly speaking, the roots of the word ecto, outside, and genesis, development, suggest this literally means development outside, that is, outside the body. But since that is the norm in most of the biological world, the focus in practice is on the development of placental mammals, specifically humans, outside the maternal body, where this development would normally happen inside. A distinction is usually made between full and partial ectogenesis. Full ectogenesis is the babies in a bottle vision often espoused in science fiction, the complete development of a new human or other mammalian being outside the maternal body from conception to babyhood. Partial ectogenesis is the partial development of new mammals outside the maternal body, where normally this development happens inside. In contrast to full ectogenesis, partial ectogenesis is both real and prevalent. IVF involves partial ectogenesis. The embryo initially develops in a petri dish rather than in a mammalian body. At the opposite end of the process, the neonatal incubation of preterm infants also involves partial ectogenesis. The 28-week-old 1K preemie undergoes development for many weeks to come that normally happens inside the womb. But if partial ectogenesis is already a reality, then why did the Nature report spark such controversy and feverish speculation? Why should an improvement in neonatal care call for this special issue such as the present one? Indeed, why should we think that partial ectogenesis raises any special or new ethical new questions at all, as opposed to just revisiting the questions that have become familiar in the wake of ongoing improvements in neonatal care over the past half-century? developments that have transformed the survival of extremely premature infants from sci-fi territory curiosity to routine medical reality. What all this suggests is that the popular imagination, as well as the bioethical literature, there exists a difference between neonatal incubation and artificial gestation. But if we take that seriously, then what people mean by ectogenesis cannot be merely development outside the body that normally happens within, as we defined it earlier. It must also be a kind of development outside the body that is in some way relevantly different from neonatal incubation. What then is this? Perhaps it is development inside an artificial womb as opposed to an incubator, but that just leads us to the following question. What makes something an artificial womb as opposed to a neonatal incubator? There is a mix here of genuine question and mere linguistic confusion. The latter is easily dealt with. Let ectogenesis be a general term for mammalian development outside the maternal body, where this normally happens within. Thus, both IVF and the neonatal incubation of premature infants genuinely involved partial ectogenesis. Let ectogestation be the term for whatever it is that people want to pick out when they differentiate between neonatal incubation and what they think of as genuine artificial gestation, be it full or partial. The genuine under-considered question before us then is to spell what makes something ectogestation rather than just ectogenesis. Okay. Setting other important social and ethical questions aside, which no doubt will be discussed elsewhere in this volume, this will be the focus of the current paper, and our contention is that spelling out this difference requires that we consider the nature or metaphysics of pregnancy. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're just trying to figure out artificial womb versus neonatal incubator, and not just linguistic confusions. So this looks like a negative thing for ectogestations, just whatever is not the other one. So when they differentiate between neonatal and just regular gestation, I guess. Between neonatal incubation and what they think of as genuine artificial gestation. So we have to, I guess the trick is just going to be zeroing in on this difference then. Okie dokie, so. Romanus on distinguishing artificial womb technology versus incubation. Okay. But first we shall consider a proposal by Romanus that distinguishes between what she calls artificial womb technology, AUT, and neonatal intensive care, NIC. Her analysis is a step in the right direction, but as we shall see, is insufficient to grasp the full difference between ectogenesis and ectogestation. First, Romanus states that the purpose of AUT is to treat a gestateling, her term for the subject of AUT, that is an artificial womb technology denizen, as if it had never been born. This makes the gestateling more ontologically similar to the pre-viability fetus in utero than to what is thought of as a newborn baby. But what does this mean? For surely birth, if anything, is the leaving of the maternal body, whether vaginally or abdominally. A gestateling has left the maternal body, so in what way can it be treated as if it has never been born? And indeed, in what way is the gestateling ontologically similar to the pre-viability fetus in utero? Romanus does not answer these questions. Second, Romanus claims that the AUT requires of its subject no exercise of any independent capacity for life. But that is false. Embryos' uterus have many capacities for life that on several reasonably understandings can be characterized as independent. Most obviously, they sustain their own independent circulation, heartbeat, which the recent technological developments directly exploit. Perhaps all Romanus meant to indicate here was that AUT requires less independence than NIC. But that is hardly helpful. Neonatal care of a 24 compared to a 36 or 36-week-old preemie also requires comparatively less independence, as does the care of a newborn compared to that of a preschooler. Which of the many possible transitions along this continuum matter for distinguishing AUT and NIC? Romanus does not tell us. Third, Romanus claims that gestation, whether in or ex utero, is distinct from continuing to develop after being born. Gestation is a process of formation. Conventional NIC is not a creative process. AUT, however, is. But in what way is gestating a 40-week fetus from another week creative in a way that incubating a 25 25-week-old neonate is not. On the face of it, a 25-week-old neonate undergoes much more substantive and rapid development, especially cognitively, than the 39-week-old fetus, which is mostly just packing on fat. Romanus' characterization of gestation is, as such, unhelpful here. Fourth and finally, Romanus remarks on the different options for environmental engagement that OUGHT facilitates as compared to NIC. The premature neonate is available for social interaction, can experience the benefits of connection with other human beings, and become embedded in social networks. The gestateling is shut off from the outside world and does not touch, smell, or interact with anything other than its artificial gestator. So it's like a phenomenological distinction. You don't what you actually can interact with. An interaction distinction. Interesting. Okay, but still wrong, I guess. But surely the effects on human interaction are much more complicated than Romanus lets on here. Yeah, that's not going to do it. The fetus because it's one of those, you're imagining something that you basically can't imagine. You're like one of those, how would you know what it is to be a bat? How would you know what it is to be a neonate or a nick or an odd or whatever the exact thing under question here is. Okay, the fetus in utero may not be able to see or touch others, not be seen or heard, but is constantly touching the maternal body from the inside and is hearing and experiencing through her some of her social network. The neonate, by contrast, may be seen as well as heard, but is residing in the hospital and therefore is mostly isolated from the maternal body, which it can now only touch from the outside, and almost completely isolated from its future social environment. Things are different again for the gestateling, which in the current setup does not feel or taste the maternal body at all, nor has any access to her social world, or wider social world. Yeah, so I don't think you're going to get a distinction here because we have no real, I agree with the authors. We don't have much of a common understanding of what counts as a human interaction anyway, so you can't make hay using that distinction. Romanus deserves credit for identifying the right questions, but falls short of providing answers. This is not surprising. Hey, be nice. Why is this not surprising that Romanus messed up, or didn't get as far as you want? To actually understand these issues, or so we submit, we need to understand the under-considered nature of gestation and birth. The metaphysics of pregnancy, distinguishing fetuses and neonates. What is the metaphysics of pregnancy or the nature of gestation? What are the entities involved in this process? How do they relate to each other? And how do these questions differ for similar entities that having a different reproductive biology, such as a bird sitting on or an embryo developing in an egg? Given both the common and mundane nature of pregnancy as an essential part of the mammalian life cycle and its highly unique aspects, the physical intertwinement of what might be considered two separate individuals, it is truly as astonishing that no more attention in philosophy or bioethics has been paid to these questions. Yeah, you know what happens when something's really hard, people actually ignore it. You'd think that'd not be the case, but people need to publish papers and do things that they think are useful, and so when it gets too hard, you get the opposite problem. Be like, oh no, we can't handle that. In recent work, Kingma has begun to address them, focusing on the metaphysical relationship between the fetus and pregnant organism. Kingma attentively argues in favor of what she calls the parthood view, the view that embryos' fetuses are a proper part of the pregnant organism, like organs, tissues, blood, or any other body part. But we don't need to accept this claim to treat Kingma's research as a source of inspiration for considering the more general question about the nature of pregnancy in the context of distinguishing ectogestation from neonatal incubation, as we shall do in this paper. Our claims and arguments are therefore compatible with, but not reliant on, the truth of Kingma's parthood view. What we do directly take from Kingma is the more general idea that contemporary Western culture fosters an understanding of pregnancy. Kingma labels the fetal container model, a tendency to depict, speak, and imagine fetuses as a separate individuated babies that are incubated in pregnant women. Kingma writes, the fetal container model emphasizes the physical resemblance and continuity between human fetuses and babies, presenting them as already separate individuals, while at the same time de-emphasizing the fetus's location within and connection to the gestator. Images of human pregnancy, for example, de-emphasize, fade out, omit the gestator, placenta, and umbilical cord. Our natural language similarly reinforces this idea. It is common to refer to human fosters as babies almost regardless of their developmental stage. The existence of this cultural understanding of the fetal container model is not Kingma's invention and is well supported. Kingma cites a rich tradition in history and sociology that documents its cultural dominance. If this claim is correct, then it suggests an explanation for why so little progress can be made on differentiating ectogenesis from ectogestation. For according to the fetal container model, there is nothing more to pregnancy than the incubation of an already separate individual, a baby, inside the womb. The music got too loud, sorry about that. That's what happens when you switch over to the next track. Once in a while, my apologies, and I can't hear what I'm thinking. Let's see. If gestation is nothing more than incubation, then neonatal incubation is already is ectogestation. There is no room for a gap here, and birth on this view is mere change of environment. The only difference between neonates and fetuses is their location. This leaves no room for treating extracorporeal gestation. An extracorporeal gestateling as if it had never been born, nor for saying how such a gestateling ontologically is more like a pre-viable fetus than a neonate. But the fetal container model is highly misleading. Our instinctive judgment is that there is a difference between neonatal incubation and ectogenesis. Ectogestation indicates correctly that there is more to gestation than incubation. So what can a more nuanced consideration of the nature of pregnancy and the entities involved in it tell us about the nature of ectogestation? Let's start with what Romanus calls the ontological difference between fetuses, embryos, and neonates. It is difficult to see how such a difference can be delivered by location alone, for why should location affect what things are? Philosophy of place is an interesting topic. I wish more people would look at it, but yeah, usually you do not, so it's a reasonable question to ask. Nor can the difference be of one of developmental stage alone, for although fetus stage normally precedes the baby stage, both temporally and developmentally, premature births complicates this. A 39-week-old fetus about to emerge into a healthy, screaming babyhood is much more developed physically, physiologically, and cognitively than a 24-week, 600-gram preemie barely clinging onto life in a top-level neonatal intensive care unit. Yet the latter is classed as a neonate, albeit in a very immature one, whereas the former is undeniably a fetus, even though it will become a baby very soon. There appears to be a difference between neonates and fetuses that cuts across linear progressive development, which is not captured by viability alone, and if there is a difference between incubation and ectogestation, it is not just a matter of location either. So not location and not development, so... I wonder if there's an argument to the powers of there might be some sort of essentialist powers argument, like the different powers, or does that just collapse into a developmental scheme? Yeah, it might. Okay, so I probably won't have anything too clever to say about this. Haven't thought enough about it. But anyway, Kingma's partnered view gives us one way of understanding this difference. Fetuses are body parts, neonates are not body parts. But we need not accept that claim to appreciate that fetuses and babies have a very different physiology. Most obviously, fetuses do not breathe, but oxygenate their blood via the placenta. This results in a different normal arterial and venous oxygen tensions compared to neonates, requires a different kind of hemoglobin, and so on. It also necessitates a completely different cardiovascular setup. The fetal heart functions as a single rather than in neonates a double pump, and the cardiovascular system in fetuses compared to neonates has multiple shunts, different flow rates, and blood pressures in different parts of the system, and so on. Alright. We tend to overlook these physiological differences because the cultural fetal container model conditions us to forget about them, teaching us to view the fetus as merely as a baby within. But these differences are well known in medicine and are of profound relevance to fetal, maternal, and neonatal specialists. They explain why, sometimes, for example in placental malfunction, fetuses are in great peril inside, but absolutely fine as soon as they are delivered. This is because they have difficulty performing certain physiological requirements of gestation, but no difficulty performing the physiological requirements of babies. The opposite also happens. Some pregnancies can be wholly uncomplicated, only for birth to reveal that this baby cannot or struggles to perform certain physiological requirements of babies that weren't required for fetal physiology. Think of lung problems, heart defects, etc. Yeah, so this is sort of, so what is this sort of distinction here? I assume the authors will tell me. There is thus a difference in normal physiological, yeah, I'm worried about the metaphysics here. I'm sure that they will get to that because these are metaphysicians, really. There is thus a difference in normal physiological setup between fetuses and neonates that is much more profound than location alone. We quibble over the different, we can quibble over the precise ontological weight we should assign to this difference, but we can all agree that it is much more substantial difference than either location or gestational age alone. Thus, very roughly, to be a fetus is to have a physiology characteristic of a fetus, and to be a neonate is to have a physiology characteristic of a neonate. To be a gestateling, then, is to have a physiology characteristic of a fetus, but to exist outside the gestating mammal. Alright, so we have to have some sort of metaphysics of physiology, then I suspect is what's coming. So this will be sort of like, how is the body, yeah, maybe this is a powers argument, so it'll be like the powers of the body at different times. So let's see. Once we appreciate that, it is immediately obvious that fetuses and neonates also have different physical characteristics. The fetus, to be precise, has an entire organ that the neonate lacks, a placenta. It also has an umbilical cord, an amnion and chorion, and, or so we argue, an additional body cavity filled with amniotic fluid. The neonate has none of these, for these parts were shed at or around birth. Okay, so this is a mathematical, it was a Leibnizian mathematical argument. You just different numbers of physiological pieces. Okay. This may initially seem a surprising claim because the amniotic cavity is usually present as a cavity in the gestate, or at least the cavity in which the fetus resides. So let us offer 3 basic points of defense. First, all of the amnion, chorion, and amniotic fluid, as well as most of the placenta, which also incorporates some maternal tissue, is made and produced by organic material clonally derived from the zygote. This ought to make the view that this is all part of the fetus the default. An alternative, the view that only the future body or future baby is the fetus, leaves all this stuff unaccounted for. What is it, and to what organism does it belong? Such an alternative view requires defense. Second, there is nothing intrinsically surprising about the shedding of substantial body parts at transitioning developmental stages. This is an entirely common occurrence in the natural world. Tadpoles lose their tails as they become frogs. Honey queens lose their wings after being fertilized and settle underground. Stags lose their antlers at every season, and so on. I mean, I lost my teeth when I was a kid, and then I got other teeth. Third, remember that the baby is inside a cavity picture is precisely what the cultural dominant fetal container model conditions us to believe, that the fetus looks like a baby without funny extra parts that merely reside inside the cavity in the pregnant organism. No wonder that the claim that the amniotic cavity is in fact part of the fetus would initially seem surprising. If our claim about the physical characteristics of fetus is correct, then this marks a second yet unrelated important difference between neonates and fetuses that is irrespective of their gestational age or linear development. Fetuses and neonates do not just have different physiological but different physical characteristics. Okay. Now, before you said place is not a good way to do stuff. Why is number of body parts in that case? I mean, what makes a physical characteristic important? Now, of course it's important medically, and there's a whole slew of medical reasons, but why metaphysically is a number of pieces important here? I mean, of course, yeah. So the question really is, why are these pieces significant as opposed to just like why is location significant? Why are these particular pieces metaphysically significant? Now, I'm not disputing that they are. It does seem, according to the arguments here, that they are the important pieces, or they can be viewed as important pieces. But in the metaphysics, what is I guess you could say that the fact that the current understandings of these pieces, these particular pieces, are substandard, like they do not treat these pieces well, but that doesn't tell us why they are important. That tells us why that they are not handled well at the moment. So they're good evidence, but I'm not getting the I'm not entirely sure on the ontology here. Okay, continuing. Finally, our analysis so far illuminates in what way birth is more than just a morally relevant change of location from within the gestator's physical body to outside it. According to the parted view, birth also marks a transition from being part of another organism to no longer being such a part. But even without accepting the parted view, our analysis shows that the birth is not just a change of location, but it involves topological, physical, and physiological changes, the loss and possible gain of body parts, the loss of topology, physical and physiological connections to the gestator, and an internal physiological transformation that includes changes to vascular, heart, lung, hemoglobin, etc. Some of these, for example, cardiovascular changes, happen near instantly at or around birth. Others, for example, moving to mature hemoglobin, take longer. Okay, so I'm with the authors on this sort of distinction because I think this sort of stuff, the fact that it is not covered by the previous theories is an important result. I would just, from my metaphysical background, I'd just say, look, you've got, this is what it comes to metaphysically is a powers argument. You can't, these different body parts grant different potentials. You can do potentially different things when you have the different body parts, and so that is what is metaphysically significant about them, because that's what like when the neonate, I'm losing the terms already, has this amniotic fluid, umbilical cord, amnion, chorion, and so on, then it has certain abilities that change the physiology, and that is actually what determine the physiology. So the powers are different at different points in the thing. So this, I think, is a powers argument, which is interesting, because you lose power and gain different powers. So it's it's not developmental, because it's not an obvious sort of just like development. It's a like switching out of powers, which is a metaphysically different sort of thing. Okay, not just developing powers. You're actively dropping and gaining them, which is fun. That's interesting. Distinguishing ectogenesis and ectogestation and further conceptual clarifications. How can all this deliver a distinction between ectogenesis and ectogestation? Remember that Romanus attempted to provide such a distinction but did not succeed because she did not tell us A, what it meant to treat a gestateling as if it had never been born, and B, in what way B, in what way a gestateling was ontologically more similar to a pre-viable fetus than a neonate. C, in what relevant way a neonate behaves more independently than a fetus gestateling. Or D, in what way gestation differed from development after being born. Our analysis of the nature of pregnancy in the previous section allows us to answer all these questions in detail. First, gestatlings are treated as if they had never been born, not in the sense that they haven't left the maternal body, for they have, but in the sense that they haven't undergone the transition from a fetal physiology to a neonatal physiology. Okay, so, I'm just ignorant of the background here, so I don't know what this this means. But you have to sort of have a identity criterion for fetal physiology and neonatal physiology, and that's where the metaphysics would come in. Like, how do you identify them? What is it to be one of those things and not the other? Thus, they are only born in the sense that they have changed location from inside to outside the maternal body, that is, born by location change. But they are not born in the sense that they have changed their physiology from fetus to neonate, that is, born by physiological change. Second, this specifies the way in which gestatlings are more ontologically similar to fetuses than neonates. They retain fetal physiology, as they have not undergone the born by physiology change from fetuses to neonate. Third, the relevant way in which neonates have more independently than just have neonates behave more independently than gestatlings is that, however much supported, they operate on the physiological blueprint of a neonate, which is almost entirely independent from maternal physiology, as opposed to a fetal physiological blueprint, in which is normally entirely dependent on and integrated in maternal physiology. Yeah, see, this is like dependent. So we've got physiological dependencies here, which is this is, I think, sort of like the bit of the crux here. Finally, and this is the fourth point in our analysis elucidates how development during gestation is distinct from continuing to develop after being born, not in the sense that one is creative where the other is not, which is vague, but in the sense that one involves developing on a fetal physiological blueprint, or we might say as a fetus gestateling, whereas the other involves developing on a neonatal physiological blueprint, or we might say as a neonate baby. Okay. So we've got these two, so we've got some sort of schematization here. Where's the blueprint? Yeah, this one. We got blueprint, sort of. So we've got a schematization, which I don't know what the blueprint means here, actually. So we've got some sort of schematization of how certain things happen, have powers, or have physical, are physically involved or realized, and so we've got. I fear that where does the blueprint come from then? But it's clearly coming from biological research, but what is the significance of it? So we gotta, yeah. So I'm just being grumpy. I'm sorry. It's just going back to what I was saying earlier. In combination, this delivers the contrast we seek between ectogenesis and ectogestation. Oh, yeah, the contrast we see between ectogenesis and ectogestation. Yeah, so they're going to answer my questions. Thank you, authors. Incubators as a non-ectogestative version of versions of ectogenetive technology support neonates taking over, assisting with functions they cannot yet perform. Yeah, so this is what I was saying about powers. So it's some sort of taking over or assisting with. So we've got this and this. So we've got these two things that are sort of interacting, and that there is the crux, at least for me. They do so on the physiological blueprint of a baby born by physiological change as well as born by location change neonate. Ectogestative technologies, by contrast, support gestatelings. They take over or assist with functions that cannot be performed on the physiological blueprint of a fetus. Ectogestation, and here's our rough definition, is thus development after being born by location change, but before being born by physiological change. That is, development outside the maternal body that prevents the physiological transformation from fetus to neonate. Okay, so this is what's coming on. We've got some sort of interaction here between functions that they can and cannot perform, and that it depends on both the baby, or not the baby, gosh, I can't get the gestateling, the difference between what the gestateling and neonate, their interaction with the world, and what they can, and how they interact with it to maintain their life in some sense, because they have functions which need to be performed by different sort of either by their own systems or by some other system outside of them. And so this functional interaction is really what it comes down to. So that is actually good, because you can actually go and look for that and do metaphysics on that at the same time. So that's very good. With this clearer understanding of the difference between ectogenesis and ectogestation, and between fetuses, gestatelings, and neonates regardless of gestational stage, we are in a position to make further conceptual distinctions that may help to clarify future discussion on these topics. Yeah. This is big words, hard to say. I'm sorry. First, Romanus. Helpful terminology. Using Romanus helpful terminology, we should distinguish fetuses, gestatelings, and neonates. Fetuses and gestatelings, however much supported, are not yet born by physiology change and have fetal physiology and characteristics. Neonates, by contrast, are born by physiology change and have neonatal physiology and characteristics, again, however much supported. Gestatelings share with neonates, in contrast to fetuses, that they are born by location change and hence reside outside rather than inside the maternal body. We agree with Romanus that it is helpful to clearly distinguish these categories, because the term neonate and fetus each carry connotations that are not or only sometimes applicable to gestatelings. Keeping these distinctions in mind does not in itself settle ethical questions, but does help to separate relevant moral concerns that are otherwise too easily run together. For example, it is widely and reasonably supposed that those who are pregnant have some special say over their fetus, even if it is deemed a person or possessor of moral status, because it resides in it, is part of, uses their body. In normal pregnancy, these three characterizations, resides in, is part of, and uses, run together, and there is no obvious need to distinguish them for moral purposes. But for moral purposes, any one of them means that the pregnant person's autonomy over their body ought to be included as a main, though not the only, relevant consideration in virtually any ethical discussion involving pregnancy fetus. After birth, by contrast, although the formerly pregnant person usually has some say over the neonate, they no longer have a say on the grounds of their bodily autonomy. Ectogestation may mean some of these three characterizations could come apart. The gestateling is neither inside nor uses the gestator's body, but it might be possible to argue that it is still a body part, albeit a detached one. So we've got like Gavagai, but for babies. No, I apologize, that was not philosophically or otherwise right. It's funny. Alright. Such a claim needs defense, of course, as do its supposed implications, which are far from clear. Even if the gestateling were such a body part, it is a further question whether and how the ethics of detached body parts, considered sperm or blood, let alone the ethics of detached body parts over which there are competing claims, considered donated blood or a kidney promised and ready for transplantation, compared to the ethics of attached body parts. Yeah, there's that great recent work in the HeLa cells. Henrietta Lacks got very blew up a few years ago because for those who don't know, Henrietta Lacks was a African American lady, and she had cancer, and her cancer was special in that like it just kept going and going. The cells would just keep replicating, and so Henrietta Lacks has been dead for a long time. But we've got these HeLa cells are called for Henrietta Lacks, and just her stuff, just they're everywhere. Like this is what people study because they just keep replicating, and so who has rights to that? And the family doesn't get anything out of it, but like the medical community has made a lot of use of them. Anyway. Conversely, if the gestateling is not a body part, or if it is not relevant that it is a body part, then the ethics of gestatelings and fetuses, whatever their cognitive, physiological, and developmental similarities, will always be different but not the other. We must involve consideration of the gestator's autonomy. Either way, carefully bearing in mind the relevant differences between gestatelings, fetuses, and neonates is essential for the quality of these and other ethical debates. Second, we can distinguish between different extracorporeal support systems. We already distinguished the more general category of ectogenesis, including neonatal incubation and IVF, from its more specific subset, ectogestation. But we can make further distinctions amongst ectogestative technologies. Consider again the Nature report. Its system is extracorporeal and maintains fetal physiology. It runs blood out of the umbilical cord through a pump-free oxygenator and suspends the gestateling's body in amniotic-like fluid. Cardiovascular setup and oxygenation happen on the blueprint of a fetal physiological system. We therefore concur with Romanus, and contrary to what the scientists themselves implied in various press statements, that this is definitely an ectogestative technology, not mere incubation. But, and here we separate from Romanus, this does not mean it is the provision of an artificial womb. Instead, it is the provision of engineered replacements for parts of the fetus gestatling's body. Just as a kidney dialysis machine replaces or takes over the function of kidneys, and just as a bionic leg replaces the leg, the reported technology replaces the placenta and amniotic sac. The womb itself is not replaced. The lamb in a sac is most like a free-floating fetus in its artificial amnion. Hence, a more apt label would be artificial amnion and placental technology. Alright, very, very cute. Apt is apt. Alright. Setting physical and technological possibility aside, we can conceive of different kinds of ectogestative technology that replace fewer of the fetus gestating body parts. We could conceive of a technology that, instead of using a biobag, leaves the actual amnion chorion intact. All that would be replaced is the placenta. Or we could imagine leaving the placenta intact, which probably means removing the gestator's womb, or part of the womb as well as the fetus. What then could be replaced would be the maternal circulation, perhaps via a combination of heart, lung, and kidney dialysis machines that feed the major arteries and veins serving the placenta womb on the maternal side. Yeah, it's a little creepy, but yeah, I mean, you can imagine something like the mother is dying, and so you need to basically save the baby at that point, or not the baby, the save whichever the correct terminology is, and so you have to basically prop up the mother's systems entirely. Perhaps such technologies would be more appropriately called artificial wombs, though really they would not be artificial wombs either, but something like partial artificial gestational bodies. You'd have you'd have to completely have the mother's body sort of replaced. We should pause here to ask why the artificial womb is such an alluring concept when all the things that can be replaced, amniotic sac, placenta, maternal circulation, and or vascular interface, the womb itself is actually the least interest. Well, it's society, it's not the science. Why then do we find it so tempting to think of and present these technologies as artificial wombs as opposed to artificial fetal organs? Again, this is neatly explained by the cultural dominance of the fetal container model. This conditions us to think of pregnancy as incubation, as providing a house, a womb, a container, in which resides a free-floating baby, a pink one without funny parts. This gives us only one way in which to frame the report and understand ectogenetic scientific developments as the beginning of the artificial womb. This in turn results in an understanding and reporting that reinforces that fetal container model. Given how much the fetal container model leads our thinking astray, we should do well to break the cycle. It would be both helpful as well as scientifically and metaphysically more accurate to put the term artificial womb to rest and to speak of ectogestation as opposed to ectogenesis in its place and the more specific technology at stake. Artificial placenta, artificial decidua, artificial amnion, etc. Yeah. Concluding remarks. Considering the metaphysics of pregnancy or the nature of gestation can spell out a clear conceptual distinctions where previously there lay confusion. It identifies clear physical and conceptual differences between fetuses, gestatlings, and neonates, which cut across developmental stage or length of gestation, and which are about more than location alone. It also delivers a distinction between neonatal incubation and ectogestation. The former supports the physiological blueprint of a neonate, the latter a fetal physiological system. That does not mean there could not be gray areas. For example, we could imagine technologies that mix some elements of both blueprints, for example, maintaining a fetal physiological, cardiovascular, and oxygenation, but without a biobag so that the skin functions in the way it would do after birth. That is not a problem for our claims. Such technology would result in a genuine intermediary case, and we could then quibble about which aspects of physiology ought to be dominant for adequate classification into gestatling or neonate. Technology often allows us to blur or suspend transitions that in nature are relatively clear-cut, involving a cascade of related changes. We can similarly suspend people on the cusp of death, for example, resulting in a lively literature on which of many transitions that occur in nature together really spell death. That does not undermine that there is a firm and meaningful difference between alive and dead organisms, and neither would an intermediate technology undermine the difference between fetuses and neonates. Let us finish then with some remarks on what the conceptual work here does and does not suggest, as well as noting any issues that remain. First, what are the ethical implications? These rarely follow directly from any metaphysical analysis. On the one hand, many conceptual and ethical questions that supposedly derive from ectogestation may actually be generic to all ectogenetic technologies. For example, ectogestation pushes for the limits of viability or significantly improves survival and lowers the risk of premature birth, and then that is relevant for ethical decision making. But the relevant questions would be affected just as much if other forms of ectogenesis, such as neonatal incubation, had these effects. And indeed, our recent history shows that improvements in neonatal incubation do have such effects. Second, we also submit that the details of ethical questions are likely to depend much more on the actual technological abilities afforded by any particular system rather than on the type of technology that it is. So, yeah, see, this is what I was saying earlier. Technological abilities afforded. This is the powers issue. This is exactly where the rubber is going to hit the road. What exactly and how exactly are the abilities afforded being provided? Okay, so that's like sort of where where exactly the metaphysics turns into like actual technology here. Okay, as we argued, the nature system is genuinely ectogestative. That remains true even if for technological reasons the technology could only ever be used on, say, 26-week-old preemies. That would leave the seemingly paradoxical situation that 26-week-old preemies need to be and remain incubated as neonates, assuming plausibly that having transitioned physiologically to a neonate, there is as yet no way back, whereas 26-plus-week-old preemies can be ectogestated as fetus gestatelings. But this only seems paradoxical if one expects too much from one distinction. It emphasizes once again that progressive linear human development is cross-cut by the distinctions between neonates, fetuses, and gestatelings. Equally, the relative actual safety profiles on different systems will have much more significant ethical consequences, for example, affecting maternal decision-making in premature onset of labor, than the type of system it is. Yeah. So, like, how does this actually work? Important. Okay, third, we want to revisit an observation by Romanus that OUGHT, unlike neonatal incubation, is almost entirely non-invasive. Support mechanisms surround rather than aggressively invade the gestateling. According to our analysis, this is incorrect, or at least misleading. The recent technological developments are invasive ones. They remove and replace entire fetal organs, the placenta, amnion, etc., and invade main umbilical veins and arteries. Now, this invasion may well be less stressful and painful for the developing human, and less disturbing to its physiology than neonatal incubation. Excuse me. It may also be the case that where artificial oxygenation is only done in case of impending miscarriage, the placenta and amnion were about to be lost anyway. Invasiveness alone does not have direct ethical consequences. Even so, it is important to be precise, particularly if we were to consider ectogestation for reasons other than impending miscarriage or premature birth. It may then matter ethically that such a technology does invade the fetus gestateling. Fourth, our analysis foregrounds another aspect of invasiveness that is morally relevant but tends to be underappreciated: on the gestator's body. In the view outlined, ectogestation, as opposed to incubation, involves the preservation of fetal physiology. But since birth is not just a change of location but also a physiological transition, successful ectogestation requires that this physiological transition from fetus to neonate is prevented from happening. Almost certainly, this requires a cesarean section to prevent a physiological transition from being triggered by the actual birthing process, the expulsion via the vagina. But put more vividly, successful ectogestation almost certainly requires what is effectively a fetal transplant rather than a birth. And this requires invasive medical action on the maternal body. This is the one aspect of ectogestation that clearly does raise ethical issues that does not apply to neonatal incubation. Any ethical discussion involving ectogestation must therefore always involve consideration both of the woman's bodily autonomy rights and of possible risk to her health and well-being. This is relevant to moral analysis to core, but especially, again, if use of ectogenesis is suggested for further reasons other than impending premature birth. Fifth, the fuller and more nuanced understanding of gestation, ectogestation, fetuses, and birth offered in this paper could improve speculation, as that is all it can currently be, about possible trajectories toward full ectogenesis. Partial ectogenesis presently exists at both ends of the gestational period. Early embryos can spend time in a petri dish in the first few days of development. Neonates can spend months in an incubator at the other. It may and frequently is, glibly assumed that it is only a matter of time before improvements at both ends meet in the middle, so to speak. But considering the difference between incubation and ectogestation suggests that things are more complicated. First, until 2017, none of the existing developments were actually ectogestation. Whilst ectogestation now seems feasible in the latter half of pregnancy, it is worth noting that IVF still does not involve ectogestation, for plausibly IVF precedes pregnancy. Kingma intimates that implantation, at least in the case of IVF, is when a blastula becomes a physiological part of the pregnant organism. If that indeed defines the start of pregnancy, then the challenge of ectogestation as opposed to ectogenesis still has to be met at the beginning part of pregnancy. Okay, so this is because this would be the first physiological power that's being, the first technological, no, where was it? This would be the first change in abilities based on physiology that, so down here, this is a very good question of where things start, because if you're gonna make the definition as I view it of interactive powers, then this is the first interactive power that gets modified, I guess you could say. And so at that point you've got the metaphysical change of potentialities. So okay, and even if it can be met, it is still not clear that two technologies could meet in the middle quite so easily. For and then how does one change into the other? So this is another very good question here. So green and blue. No, we got two colors. And even if it can be met, it is still not clear that two technologies could meet in the middle quite so easily, for ectogestative efforts at the beginning of pregnancy do or would focus on an interface, most likely vasculated tissue, in which the blastula can develop and implant. After this, it must develop in its own chorion, placenta, etc., as well as a fetal body. But as we saw, at the other end of pregnancy, ectogestational efforts do not focus on an interface in which the placenta may form, but on replacing fetal parts. So yeah, you're doing two very different sort of, you're treating the organism, or the one of those big words, in very different ways, how you're interacting with it, and so how you meet them in the middle is conceptually not clear. Okay, the two developments may well meet in the middle, but such a meeting would not be seamless. The meeting may still require a transfer of the fetal body from its previous womb-like artificial environment or vascular interface onto ectogestative support technology that is invasively removes and replaces its placenta and amnion. Yeah, and so the conceptual difference here is how you're treating the object itself, and so there's a metaphysical shift along with the technological shift, and so it's just because in some sense we know it's going to happen, that doesn't mean we understand what we're talking about. There's a conceptual gap between these things still. Okay, getting to be an hour, almost done. We want to conclude with the following remark. In bioethics and philosophy, there is a considerable metaphysical and ethical body of literature on fetuses. Mostly this focuses on the ethical implication of progressive fetal development, for example, its implications for moral status and or the permissibility of abortion. A second focus, though more often forgotten, is the moral relevance of the physical location inside the maternal body. This brings the fetus within the purview of her bodily autonomy and means it is directly affected by her self-regarding actions. This paper highlights a third important metaphysical issue that is nonlinear and which may have moral implications. Birth marks a substantive physiological transition beyond change of location alone, which makes fetuses and neonates very different from each other, regardless of gestational age or level of linear development. It is not clear what, if any, the ethical implications of that is, and we leave that work for others. But it is sometimes claimed that physiological transformations may not just happen to heart and lungs, but also cognitively. If that is true, then that would add what seems on the face of it an important moral dimension separate from linear development alone. Okie dokie. So this was good. So it shows that the parts of pregnancy can't really be understood outside of physiological abilities, which I was calling powers here, and then how the technology relates to those abilities, because that's what the technology can support. However, those how you actually can conceive of that stuff really makes a difference, because they are not going, like, powers are sort of like independent things. They just don't like generate into other stuff, and so you can't just turn one power into another. It doesn't make sense. So we've got a bunch of different stuff that the ethicists can try to do when it comes to understanding the future of incubators, or artificial wombs, and ectogestation, ectogenesis, all these things. So, and then the general other state of childbirth. Okay, but that's it for now. I hope you have a good day, stay safe, and enjoyed this article. I'll probably be back later today. I'll be off. I'll usually take Mondays off, so I'll be back probably Tuesday. And stay safe, everyone, and hope you have a good day. Bye bye.